Hi and welcome, Mindsetters, to this important revision program. I formally welcome you. I urge you at the same time that you need to take these little bits very seriously because they can help you to master the skills necessary for you to conquer that big thing called examinations. Let's go straight into the questions. Notice we're starting with question 1. Normally in your papers, you do not see a question 1 like this. In your papers, you see section A, which has shorter questions, namely multiple choice questions, one-word answers, and multiple matching, and maybe some other further objective type of questions. Here we're going straight into the section B type of questions. In your booklets, you will find samples of section A questions in this particular paper as well. You can go through those at your leisure and work on those. Remember, the first section, section A, touches a lot on terminology, definitions, etc. So you need to know that. You need to build your vocabulary. This vocabulary can only be built when you encounter a new word, check the meaning. Most textbooks that you use today have a glossary, and most of the important biological terms are found in this glossary. So make a point. When you find a new word, look at the letter. It is categorized or referenced in alphabetical sequence at the end of your textbook. Look for that word and look at its meaning and give it your own flavor. In other words, write that word down and next to it the correct word, the meaning in your own words without losing the meaning, so that it is yours now. You're not learning directly from the textbook. So keep in mind that and work on those skills. Let's look at question 1. The diagram below, now here we're starting with a question dealing with clad diagrams or cladograms or phylogenetic trees. Phylogenetic trees, which shows the relationship between different organisms over time based on classification of different development in their timelines. The diagram below represents a cladogram or a phylogenetic tree showing relationships between animal phyla. So this particular one is dealing with certain animal phyla that you have studied. The letters A to D indicate the characteristics shared by the different phyla of animals which follow the letter. The point where various phyla differ from each other is indicated by the branching off or split into new phyla. So you needed to read that important information. They explain in words what the phylogenetic tree is doing. Now this is becoming the pattern of examiners. They find that we're just putting the phylogenetic tree, which you're supposed to have learned in the first place. What is a phylogenetic tree and how it works, etc. But they take it for granted that many of you do not learn that properly. So what they're doing is they're telling you in the instructions that this is what this phylogenetic tree does, or this is what this investigation is all about. They give you all the information. You need to read the information. So here we go. So here the word comes in multicellular at this joint. And thereafter, Poriferous, Cnidaria, Platyhelminthes, Annelida, Arthropoda, Chordata, and the letters A, B, C, and D, indicating, as I said earlier, where a branching off or split took place between different phyla. Which characteristic is shared by all the organisms in the animal kingdom according to this cladogram. Where do they come from? Look at this word multicellular. It's there. And in other words, they are all branching off from that line that says multicellular organisms running across that way there. So the characteristic that they all share is obviously multicellular. They're all multicellular. Good. Which letter represents each of the following characteristics with respect to body plan? In other words, we're looking at the body plans and we want to know which letter A to D, can only be A, B, C or D, represents each of these things. And you obviously needed to know your work in terms of these phyla. These phyla displayed to you different characteristics because that information is not readily available on this particular cladogram. You needed to know your work, so the knowledge is being tested here. So the question then is, which letter represents each of the following? What characteristic? The first one is cephalization. Before we go into that, let's explain. So you are learning also what cephalization means, and we're trying to fit it into what you know already. Cephalization refers to the concentration of nerves in the anterior end of an organism or in the head region. Concentration of nerves in the front, anterior meaning front of the body, or in the head region. So they want to know which letter that came from. B. The answer is B. So notice where it came from, cephalization. In your work, from the platyhelminthes, from then onwards, in the earthworm already, you find the cerebral ganglia that has been formed in the front of the body, the anterior end. And this will lead to other developments as we will learn as we go along. Because that part of the body, that anterior end, is the part of the body that encounters the environment first. So it is apt for the nerves to be concentrated in that area so it can receive as much stimuli from the environment as it moves forward. The next one asks for triploblasty. That would also be the platyhelminthes because anything before that were diploblastic. All these ones were diploblastic, etc. We're not going to go into the details of that, but at least diploblastic or one layer only. So here we're talking about triploblastic. Again, what is triploblasty? Meaning that the organism arises from 3 embryonic layers. When the embryo started, it had 3 living layers, which were the ectoderm. Ectoderm indicates that it's living. Then the endoderm. And in the middle of these two would be the mesoderm. So ecto, outside, endo, inside, and in between, middle, meso. In between, mesoderm. You'll notice that in the other area, other animals like the cnidarias, you would have had, instead of mesoderm, you would have mesoglia, a jelly-like layer in between the ectoderm and endoderm. So the mesoglia was not a living layer, and therefore it has 2 living layers, becomes diploblastic. So the earthworm onwards was your triploblasty. The next one was the coelom. So where does the coelom come in? The coelom comes in from C, there, in this area there. Okay? Coelom, body cavity. Simple, no explanation needed there. A body cavity. So that steps in when we're talking of annelids. Bilateral symmetry. From B, from here already, from this point onwards, from the platyhelminthes being the flatworms onwards, we're getting this story coming in of bilateral symmetry. But now the question is, what is this bilateral symmetry that we're talking about? Bilateral symmetry means that if we cut the organism longitudinally through the middle, it will yield 2 equal halves. That means whatever is on one side will be on the other side. This, by the way, the significance of bilateral symmetry helps the organism to move in a forward direction. Next one talks about segmentation. Where did segmentation come in? From C. Again, after the platyhelminthes, but before the Annelida. Annelida, segmented worms. Platyhelminthes, flatworms. Annelida, segmented worms. Their body is made up of segments. So that's at point C. A vertebral column would be D. The vertebral column coming from, what word comes from that? Vertebrates. Why they call vertebrates? Because they have a vertebral column, a backbone through which the nerve cord or the spinal cord can run through. And that is not found up to the arthropods there. Up to that point, there's no backbone. So the answer would be D after that, okay? Symmetry, A. Symmetry, the fact that there is some form of symmetry. They're not saying radial, they're not saying bilateral, they're saying symmetry. There's some form of symmetry that appears. Before that, the porifera, they have no symmetry, they're asymmetrical. From point A, you're getting symmetry stepping in there. So that is where the whole story comes in there. So that is A. C, explain one importance of the development of a coelom, a body cavity. What advancements or what advantage did this give to that organism where it was found? And the answer is simple. It separates, first of all, the gut, the internal, from the body wall. So it separates the gut from the body wall, allowing for extensive growth of organs in the system. In addition to that, it also acts as a hydrostatic skeleton because it has inside coelomic fluid in some organisms. Not in all organisms, but in some organisms you're going to get the coelomic fluid, so it acts as a hydrostatic skeleton for that organ as well. Write down the names of the phyla that display the characteristics represented by C, but not the characteristic represented by D. Now you've got to be careful. They want to know those organisms that have this characteristic called C, but they do not have this characteristic called D. But it's obvious. What comes after that? These two. And what comes after that, after D? The chordata. So you cannot include chordata in your answer. So it's Annelida and arthropod. And you cannot include any organism that came before C, because C indicates that this feature is only found in those organisms that came after. The branching took place after that. Describe one way in which the coelom of annelids and arthropods are different. In this case, we simply say that the coelom in arthropods is reduced, first of all. It's smaller and contains hemocoels. Smaller. Coelom in annelids contains coelomic fluid. And in that case, when we have the coelomic fluid in the annelids, the coelomic fluid acts as a hydrostatic skeleton. Remember, in the arthropods, they have an exoskeleton. Not part of the answer, but part of my discussion earlier about a hydrostatic skeleton, and now we're talking exoskeleton. Exoskeleton, by the way, a skeleton that's outside the body. State one role of arthropods in agriculture. In this case, if we're asking for a role, we mean how do they help agriculture? So we're not talking of an importance. Importance can be negative and positive. Here they're talking of their role. Their role will indicate how do they help agriculture. And it's also simple. If you learn about the bees and the birds and the insects, you would know the first answer there would be that they are pollinators. They help to transfer pollen from one plant to another. They're also used in biological control of pests. In other words, if a particular pest is attacking a crop, and if the arthropod can eat that particular pest, the arthropod is introduced into the system to eat that crop. So in that way, we're not using chemicals, we're using biological. That's how we explain what a biological control, when we use an organism that eats only that organism which is causing the problem. They're also important for seed dispersal. When they eat some of the plants and they take their seeds to different areas, or in different ways when the seed gets stuck onto them and they disperse it, whichever way they're involved in seed dispersal. So that question dealt with a lot of animal diversity. We move on to plant diversity in question 2. And the question starts the following. Study the diagram below showing structures of 2 flowers as well as a pine cone. So they're giving you 2 flowers and they're giving you a pine cone. The magnification of each flower is indicated in brackets. So they gave you the magnification of that particular flower that we have drawn here. So they have flower A, flower B, and they have the pine cone. First question, as usual, label parts of D, E, and F. You want D, E, and F. D would be the anthers, E, stigma, and F, the corolla there. Let's see, how many did I get right? Here we go. Oh, 3 out of 3. Well done. Anther, stigma, and petal. Which flower, A or B, is probably pollinated by insects? Again, application question. They're giving you 2 diagrams. You've learned about flowers. You've learned that certain flowers have to have certain characteristics to be pollinated by insects, others by wind, others by water. Now you need to take that knowledge and look at these 2 diagrams and see how that characteristic is met with in this plant. Let's look at the diagrams again. Look at the first one. Does it have petals? Is it showing you any petals? No, it's not. And diagram B, it's showing you a petal. It's also showing you that the stigma and the anthers, etc., are all inside the petals. They're covered. In this one here, everything is open. So this one here is probably not pollinated by insects. It would be flower B. Let's see how correct we are again. And the answer is definitely B. Give a reason for that, and I've given you the reasons already. The filaments and stigma are enclosed. They're covered inside. So the insect has to come inside there. And they have a large corolla. Obviously, you can't see color here. You can't say it's brightly colored, etc. Observable reasons. You can't see color here. But you can see they have large petals. That alone may be some form of attraction to the insects. Which flower, A or B, is larger? Which of the 2 flowers is larger? Now here, the trick was, if you look at it on face value, flower A is larger. That's what it looks like in the diagram. On your question paper, it would be looked like. But look at the magnification. Look at the magnification at the bottom. Times 20. And this one is times 0.5 only. So obviously, guys, this one needed a smaller magnification, and it's almost the same size as that one. So therefore, and look at the magnification. This one is times 20. That one is times 5, 0.5. It's 25% of the magnification of that one. So therefore, flower B would be the larger of the 2 in terms of the magnification. Skill to learn, look at the magnification. Don't be fooled by just looking at the diagrams. B is correct. Identify the groups to which flower A and the pine cone belong. So the flowers, what group do they belong to? And the pine cone, what does it belong to? You needed to know your work, and if you knew your work, you would be able to say that the one belongs to angiosperms and the other one to gymnosperm. Angiosperm and gymnosperm. They both, by the way, belong to the big group called spermatophytes. Spermatophytes are seed-bearing plants, and of that they belong to these 2 groups, angiosperm and gymnosperm. And the next question will give you why we call them angiosperm and gymnosperm. State one way in which the seeds of groups mentioned there differ from each other, and that's where the crux comes from, the name, or the name comes from that. Gymnosperms, the seeds are naked. Now, hey, don't get me wrong. We're not teaching you the wrong stuff here. Naked doesn't mean naked the way you're looking at it. You're already undressing somebody in your mind. No. Naked in this case means that the seed is not covered in another structure. Whereas in angiosperms, the seeds are enclosed in an ovary. In the cone, the pine cone, when you look at the female cone, you'll find if you separate those little branches, if you want to call it, they're not branches, they're actually petals of the cone. And on the top of each so-called petal, it's not a petal, all right, on each of those extensions, you'll find a seed there open. Nothing is covering it. So therefore, we say that the seed is naked. By the way, gymnospermy, spermy means seed, gymno, naked seed. Angiospermy, angio means covered. Spermy means seed. So that's where it's coming. In the angiosperm, and you all eat fruit of some type, you'll find that as you eat in the fruit, the seed is found inside. Now, before that fruit becomes a fruit, the fruit is an ovary. Yes, so you all eat ovaries. Good. Explain how the dependency on water for reproduction is reduced in the group represented by the pine cone. In other words, is the pine less reliant on water for reproduction? And if so, why? But they're telling you that it is in this case. They're telling you, yes, it is. You just have to give the how. And the answer is simple. I have to talk about the fact that when pollination takes place, the pollen tube develops. And the male gametes move down this pollen tube directly to the egg in the ovule. Now, what does it mean? It simply means that if this was a pollen grain, a pollen tube develops and the pollen grain travels down there. There's no water necessary in this process. The pollen grain simply moves down that pollen tube into the to fertilize the ovum. Whereas in the plants before this, the ferns, the bryophytes, etc., the water was essential for fertilization in the plants that you learned before this. State 2 advantages of seeds over spores. Again, straightforward level 1 question. What are the advantages? First of all, seeds have a tougher coat, and that prevents drying out or desiccation. And the advantages are generally related to the decreasing dependence on water. The advances in plants that we're moving from the lower order to the higher order plants speaks to a decreasing dependence on water and an increasing life on land, terrestrial adaptation. So seeds have food reserves. Again, because they're living on land, they have a food reserve which will obviously allow for the embryo to survive. Seeds have a fully developed embryo inside, and which will immediately start growing when conditions become favorable. Seeds have a longer lifespan than spores. Seeds can remain dormant longer than spores. These 2 points are connected. You would get one of the two if you had to answer that in an exam. So all you are saying is, what's better about the seed compared to a spore? And you would have done this because in the earlier groups that you studied, Bryophyta and the ferns, you would have then learned about spores. Now we're talking about seeds. And why would the scientists say that the seeds is better adapted? This is what you have to say. Next question, question 3. Question deals with a certain section of your work, malaria. Malaria is a parasitic disease which occurs mainly in tropical and subtropical regions, very moist areas especially, and hot. It is transmitted in humans through the bite of a female mosquito, the Anopheles species, which is the vector. Vector means the agent that carries this particular parasite. It is estimated that 1 to 3 million people die from malaria every year, and the majority are children from sub-Saharan Africa. That's where you and I live. The most effective way of managing malaria is to destroy its vector. That means the agent, the mosquito, or to stop that mosquito from getting to you. An insecticide which has been successful to date is DDT, kills mosquitoes. The inner walls of the house are sprayed with DDT so that the mosquitoes die if they sit on or near them. However, the use of DDT has been banned since 1972, and the whole section on DDT you will learn under environment and why it was banned and so on. In South Africa, the incidence of malaria has been less than 10,000 cases per year. South Africa only stopped its use of DDT in 1996. 1972, it was banned. In 1996, we came to the party only. We can imagine the harms to the environment and the people and the animals that we have caused in that time. Number of infections recorded since has increased to 64,000 in 2000. But again, now look at that, weigh that against this factor. When the use of DDT was reintroduced only for disease vector control, the reported case in South Africa decreased to 7,000 in 2005. So it's a balance here, the advantage of the environment as opposed to the decrease in the number of malaria incidents reported in it. So you needed, as I have done, I have read through each line. Notice what I have done physically. I have underlined keywords. You can do the same on your question paper, and then you go to the questions only after you've read this. Or you could have simply perused through the questions to get an idea what they're looking for, and then read the passage. So in that way, you already got in your head some questions. And as you're going through, you can maybe circle some answers that you find to the questions that you're doing. And then you physically answer the questions. That's the skill that you can employ. To which group of microorganisms does the malaria parasite, not the mosquito, the malaria parasite. If they ask you for the mosquito, you would say insect and arthropods. But they didn't ask that. Microorganisms, first of all. They're asking for microorganisms to the malaria parasite. And that is Protista. The malaria parasite belongs to the group called protists, or Protista. State any 2 ways to avoid contracting malaria. One is, if you are going to an area where there is malaria, you take the anti-malarial drugs. There are several available from the pharmacies. Or you can use insect repellents on exposed skin. That means your parts of your body that is exposed, you spray it with this insect repellent so the mosquitoes don't come near you. Or you sleep under bed nets. If you're living outside, you make sure you sleep under bed nets. Or if you have a house, in those areas, then they will put nets so that the mosquitoes do not come in. Those are simple, effective ways in doing that. If you follow the news and so on, you see how much people collect monies to send to areas in other parts of Africa to make these people protect themselves against the mosquito. If there are areas around you that have standing water, make sure you empty those areas so it doesn't attract the mosquitoes and doesn't allow for the breeding of these mosquitoes. So those are some of the ways in which you would protect yourself against malaria. That means from getting it. If you do have it, if you go to an area and you get it, then you need to seek medical attention immediately. If you come from an area that you know that has malaria and you are experiencing bouts of fever and chill and you're getting severe headaches, you're going to look at, you've learned in your work, you've learned the symptoms of malaria. So you've got to figure that, and you need to tell the doctor that I have been in a malaria, so that they can do a test, a simple test, blood test, to see whether you have malaria or not, and then they can treat you. 9 out of 10 people die of malaria because they do not seek the appropriate medical attention. They do not tell the doctors where they've been, etc., and they're not going to test it unnecessarily. Describe how the malaria parasite is passed from one human to another. And I can just imagine the answers many learners will give here, and many, what I'm talking about, many wrong answers. The correct answer, simple, a female, not human, but a female Anopheles, this should be italic mosquito, bites an infected person. When that person is bitten, the mosquito sucks blood from that person. If that person has the parasite, this parasite is sucked into this female mosquito, and it develops further in that agent or that mosquito. And then this mosquito then goes and bites somebody else. And when they bite somebody else, they transfer the parasite to that second person. So this is it. It can't go directly from person to person. It has to go, the malaria's life cycle has to have the mosquito as an intermediate host to go through. Just like the tapeworm has an intermediate host being the pig or sheep or cattle, and man being the primary or final host in that case there. So most of these parasites have that type of a life. Bilharzia also, snail and humans. Give one reason why a person with malaria cannot be treated with an antibiotic. That is because antibiotics are used for bacteria and not by, for diseases that are caused by protists or by fungus. Even if you have a fungal infection, you cannot treat it with an antibiotic. You'll have to use an antifungal for that. Explain how an increase in the number of malaria infections would affect the South African economy. Now that's an interesting shift in the types of question. Up to here it was purely on biology and life science. Now they're saying, hey, young man, young woman, how will this affect the economy? We're getting malaria. So this is now looking at how the study of life science is affecting the environment and society at large. And if you're living in this country, you should not have an excuse not to answer a question like this. Firstly, the negative effect is going to be there, obviously. Why? Because it costs money to treat people that are suffering from malaria. And at the same time, if people are suffering from malaria, they can't go to work. And if they can't go to work, then the production is also decreased. So both ways, there's a double effect on the economy. One is the workers are not going to work, so they can't produce goods. At the same time, we need to provide medication for those workers to treat them, or the children, whoever is affected. So it's a cost factor involved in that, and there's a decrease in making money because the workers are being affected if they are. So this is one way in which the data about the number of infections was collected. How this data that we're getting about the infections, where would we get it from? How? Simple. From hospital records. In other words, they go to hospitals, they collect how many people were recorded. And remember then, in that way, okay, let's go. The next question is talking about that. Give one reason why the number of infections might have been more than 7,000 in the year 2000. They ask you first, where would you get these records? Your answer is, you'd get these records from hospital. Now they're asking you, you've got these records. Why would it be more? One reason, why would it be more? And the answer is, not all affected people go to hospital in some areas. Remember, people may be living in deep rural areas, and they may have their own cures for malaria as well. Remember, there's lots of indigenous cures for lots of ailments that you and I have. We've lost touch with our roots, and we're not using those effective treatments that people use. Remember, pharmaceutical companies have learned from the indigenous people. Hey, these guys are using this particular plant, or they're using this herb, and they have now transformed the herb, the active ingredient in that herb, the thing that was causing the cure. They've obviously researched it, so it cost them money, and they developed a drug with other substances in it to help you without that plant or whatever else that was helping those people in that way. So consult with the local people in the area. How do they deal with the treatment of these things? And you'll be shocked at so many different treatments that we can get without using a medicine, Western medicine for that matter. Good. Move on to question 4. Study the table below showing the amount of food wasted per person per year. Per person per year in different developed and developing regions of the world. So they're giving you a table. Level of development. First is the region where it's found. Secondly, level of development, whether it's developed or developing. The total at production and retail stages by consumers. So what is the section actually coming from? Food wasted coming. Where does food waste come in? The heading is food security. This is the work that you're doing. And the question first says, for sub-Saharan Africa, calculate the food wasted by consumers as a percentage of the total food waste. For sub-Saharan Africa, where's sub-Saharan Africa? There you go, in this third row. And they're giving you amounts there. The total, 160. And it's divided into 155 and 5. And they say they want you to calculate as a percentage of the total. So obviously you would have to add all of these guys first and take that divided by the total times 100 to give you a percentage. And there you have it. And in this case, sorry, they asked for the food waste by consumers. Not anyone, but by consumers. So you've got to look at this last one, and that is 5. And you've got to add the others. These ones here in this column here, not all in that other column, in this column here. Notice how important it is to read. You've got to read what it's asking. It's asking that column, and the total there is 160. So it's 5 divided by 160 times 100 gives you 3.1%. So keywords, important, important, important in reading the keywords in the question. You need to read. I would have got the answer wrong if I didn't read as I went down that we're not talking about this column. We're talking about by consumers. Give a possible explanation for the low percentage calculated in A. Why is that so? Because food is scarce in sub-Saharan Africa because of poverty. There is no food left over to waste. And people that waste the food, or rather before they waste it, their leftovers, they would probably give it to other people. And even if they throw it in a bin, some people may go into the bin and take that food because of poverty and eat it up. In a richer country, you're not going to get people looking in the bins. You're not going to find a beggar to give it to. You're not going to get a poorer person to give it to. So it becomes more complicated. Give an explanation for the difference in the pattern of food wastage in developed and developing regions. Developed and developing regions. And you'll find that there's more waste in developed nations, and they want to know why. First of all, in developing nations, food purchase is often in excess of their requirements. And remember, the P is a tick. The P in this case is a tick. Why? Because for some reason in the software transferring here, the tick is replaced by a P. So wherever you see the P there, you must know it was a tick, supposed to be a tick. A P in the wrong place, that's obviously not this P here in purchase now. We're talking about a P that's in the wrong place there. It would be a tick. In a developed country, because the people have money, more money, they're going to buy more than they need, often in excess of their requirements. And people will throw unused food away. Why? Because they can afford to buy more food. 1. 2, there's no poor people to give it to in their immediate vicinity. So there's no sense doing that. So they throw it away. In developing regions, many people cannot afford food. There's a tick there. And will generally not have food in excess of their needs. And even if they do, they would find poor people to give it to. Can you see it's an open-ended question? State 2 possible ways of preventing the high levels of food waste that is found in developed countries. Now, in other words, you giving them advice. How can we bring your waste down? All dealing with food security. Answer there is simple. We plan what you need before you shop. Plan. What do you need? Make a list of needs. Not wants. What you need, not what you want. There's a difference, and we're not going to go into the debate of those two words. And reduce impulse and spontaneous buying. Because if you buy for what you want, there will be a high degree of impulse. You see, I want, I take. But you may not have needed it. You already got 3 at home. You're buying another 2 today. You didn't check at home. Understand how to store and preserve food. So when you take more food, keep it for longer so that you can utilize it for a longer period. Ensure that unused food is used in some way. Give to the poor, animal feed, compost heaps, some way or the other, you return the energy to the environment. Important that you educate people about the need to prevent waste. This education is an important key. But at the same time, people are now starting to debate. They're saying, even when we talk about how do we prevent AIDS from spreading? How do we prevent sexually transmitted diseases from spreading? How do we make people waste less? How do we make people pollute less? Often we say education. Now the other side of the coin is saying, but we've been giving people education for long periods of time. No change in attitude. But I am of the opinion that even if 5% of the people are educated by your education, if you're talking to 100 people and only 5 of them change their attitude because of what you told them, it's already a win in the right positive direction. So we move in that direction when we are going to inform people. So we can educate them, and we can say an awareness, create an awareness. In other words, you have campaigns to show people, listen, these are people that are dying. They do not have food in certain parts of the world, and you're wasting food. So you create this awareness among people. And in that way, people, we will learn how to help each other and not to waste. There's thousands of us that will have cereal in the morning. We leave the milk, and we just eat the cereal, we leave the milk. Yet, 5 kilometers down the road, there are people that are going without milk at all. Think about that before you waste your food as well in your case. I think talking about food may have caused some rumbling in your stomach and may have caused you to want a break. So we're going to give you a short break. Catch you after the break. Hi guys, and welcome back. I'm hoping you had a nice big glass of water, guys. Water is the key. The most healthy of all the liquids that you can drink is water. And at the same time, I'm hoping you had the full glass and didn't throw some of that away. Avoid food wastage. And I'm hoping whatever you had, your cookies, etc., you eat all of that and you're not going to waste. We spoke about that just now. Let's move on in our quest to gain knowledge and to gain skills in terms of where we want to be. Skills in the sense of answering questions, knowledge in terms of life science, and knowledge about the world and how life science, how our behavior and attitudes affect things around us. And this section is loaded with that type of thing. So it's loaded in such a way that we need to think about what we're doing so that we can make a mindset change. Mind the pun on mindset there, guys. When I'm talking of mindset, I'm not talking of our mindset, but I'm talking about yours and mine, and those guys out there, the one next to you, the one on the other side, the mindset, the way we think, okay? So think about what you are doing and how you can make a difference. Everything about life should be, how can I, me, yes, me, you, that's right, your I, and everybody else around us. If each of us makes a difference, what a better world we will be living in. Let's go straight to the questions. Question 5. Despite a great increase in the demand for food, only 7% more land is now used for farming. One of the reasons for this is the increased productivity. That is a higher yield per hectare due to GMOs. GMOs? Genetically, oh, what a bad speller I am. I won't make it in the spelling bee. Genetically modified organisms. So in other words, one of the reasons for what? The fact that we're using less land is because we have increased productivity. Why? Because of the use of GMOs and chemicals. That's what they're saying in this article. In the last 30 years, people have become more aware of the use of chemicals in farming. Some people are concerned about the effects of these on their health. What these? The chemicals and the GMOs. And choose to buy organically grown produce. Farmers who use organic methods to produce food do not use chemicals on their crops. In other words, they're not stimulating the crops to grow faster. They're not stimulating the crops to get bigger and better and drought resistant, etc. They're going the hardcore natural way, let nature take its course on these crops. So they're not interfering in any way in the production of this crop. Give one reason for an increase in the demand for food over the years. Why is there an increase in the demand for food? Now that's a simple question. For a simple answer, there has been an increase in the human population. You need to link this with your studies on human population, and your human population says to you that human population is growing exponentially. So there's a huge increase in the human population, and this places a greater demand on the food that is available. State one way in which the use of each of the following helps. Now watch. Very important to read what says. State one way in which the use of each helps to increase productivity. Sometimes people look at the word pesticides and you only see harm, and more harm. That's not what the question is asking you. Is they asking you, how does a pesticide help you to increase productivity? Obvious, we get rid of the pest. So if we get rid of the pest, then the crop will grow better. So pesticides kill the pests, which normally destroy the crops. And if we take the pest out of the equation, then the crop will be able to grow better. We didn't ask in this question for the disadvantage of that. We only asked about the advantages. Okay, and the use of fertilizers. How will that help us? That's also obvious. Fertilizers will increase the nutrient content in the soil. So there will be more nutrients in the soil, and more nutrients in the soil will lead to better plant growth. And if there's more plant growing, it may sustain better animal life, and therefore we'll get more food. Describe how the use of pesticides, now listen to the question. Describe how the use of pesticides could destroy food chains. Now we're looking at the ill effects. And in this case, very simply, they kill the pests which destroy the crops. That's one way there, but that's not the answer. The problem is they not only kill the crops, I mean the pests, but they also kill other organisms. And these organisms may have been important in the chain. In other words, let's take a simple equation, food chain. We have grass. Grass is eaten by a locust. Locust is eaten by a frog. A frog is eaten by a bird. Simple, very simplified one. Now, if the locust was our problem and we kill the locust, look how extensive an answer we can give here. If we kill this locust, now there's going to be nothing to eat the grass. The grass may overgrow. And because it overgrows, becomes overpopulated, and they compete and they'll all die. That's one scenario. But here you've got a farmer, he can control that. At the same time, there's no food for the frog now. The frog has to go somewhere else or stay there and die. And if that frog is dead, or if the frog or frogs move away, then there's no food for the bird. And there's no food for the bird. Can you see that if you target one particular thing, you can affect all? Apart from that, however, I'm saying that the pesticide may not only harm the locust, it may also harm the grass, it may also harm the frog, and in that way, it can lead to a collapse in the entire food chain. Explain why GMOs, genetically modified organisms, can be considered to be a threat to food security. Now we're looking at it the other side. Other side, we said GMOs are good because they're making more food. We said that in the article. Now we're asking, why can we look at the same thing and look at it as a threat to food security? And that's simply encapsulated in the biodiversity dimension. And what are we talking about? If we're going to have genetically modified organisms, they're going to outcompete. They will outcompete the natural organisms in the environment. So because of that, we'll have a loss of flora and fauna biodiversity. Because these others were growing naturally, but they had problems. So what did we do? We fixed the problem. How? We modified some of the organisms so that the problem that they were experiencing is no more bad for them. So they are now better equipped. We made them stronger. And when we made them stronger, they outgrow their other compatriots, the other organisms within their realm, in their environment. Now we are going to lose some of those natural ones. And in so doing, the entire species could be wiped out. Notice that P is a tick there, and the P is a tick there. If exposed to a new disease, another tick there, or new environmental, let's say for some reason, because now we got a uniform variety. We've modified them, so they only one type left there. Now if a new threat comes in, it will wipe them all out. They all have the same, because we have genetically modified them to be identical in our quest for better crops. Whereas when they were on their own naturally, there were some that were better equipped and some that were worse equipped. The weaker ones would die out with the threat, and the stronger ones would survive. And over time, you may get mutations, etc. And these mutations would be beneficial for the organism, and because of that, that organism can survive. But now, once we've taken out that element of nature, we have threatened the biodiversity. Good. Describe how fertilizers can cause this big word, eutrophication, when they are washed into rivers. So you don't have to talk about them washing the river. They told you in the question that they are washed into river. Fertilizers. So the farmer now sprays his crops or his land with or adds fertilizer to his land. Because of incorrect plowing methods and the rest, when the rain comes, the fertilizers are washed off and they run into the rivers and lakes and dams. Now when they get there, how do they cause eutrophication? And that's a simple question you've learned in grade 10 as well, and you're extending it into grade 11. First of all, the fertilizers contain nitrogen-rich compounds. These cause overgrowth of algae and other aquatic plants. This is known as algal bloom. Algal bloom meaning a big, quick spurt of growth of algae. This algae now forms a layer on the top of the water. And this causes a decrease in the light coming into the water. The algae is making a curtain on top of the water. Please, you can't write that in the exam. A curtain is not the issue. The curtain is the example that I'm giving you. All right? So they're forming a layer that blocks the sunlight from going further down. As a result, plants below this layer will start to die. And this will increase the amount of bacteria, because bacteria decomposes. If the plants are dying, they're going to get more bacteria to come and decompose their bodies. This leads to a decrease in the amount of oxygen, because there's a big growth in the bacteria, and they're going to use up the oxygen. Now, other organisms like fish and frogs and other organisms in the water will die because of a lack of oxygen. Can you see? One chain reaction following on the others. So a simple explanation of eutrophication and how it is done. And that takes us to question 6. This paper is loaded with environmental education. List 4 strategies that you would use to manage solid waste if you were appointed as the head of waste division, disposal division of your town. They're not talking about you in your house. They're talking about you as a town head in the council of the town. Or they could have changed the question to you as the head of solid waste disposal in South Africa. So in other words, your strategies cannot talk about what you do as an individual, but what would you do on a larger scale of the populace? And what are some of those things? I would start with this bullet here, where it says educate the people. Remember we spoke about this before? Educate people to use organic waste, for example, to make compost. In other words, take their solid waste and start making compost in their houses, so they don't have to go and buy compost. They can use the same material to fertilize their gardens. Educate, and awareness will go there as well. Then we'll as a person in that position, you can investigate methods to collect and utilize methane gas as a fuel. Meaning, this is methane gas is there. And in certain parts of Durban, in Marion Hill, etc., they've already using this methane gas to give energy for different processes. So you can do that. And you've got to investigate the ways in which you can do it in your area. Then encourage citizens of the city to sort their waste out into different waste containers. Paper, plastic, glass. So in other words, this is going to help us to recycle those things that we can recycle. Got to make partnerships with recycling companies for improvement of collection of different waste. So in other words, once you're going to first get your citizens in your area, encourage them to separate your waste. Now when you collect these waste, you're going to take them separately. So then you're going to work in partnership with a recycling company to come to the municipal areas and collect the materials that are that can be recycled. We're saving money, we're improving the economy, and we are saving on the wastes that are just being dumped and burnt, etc., etc. Now, it's no sense we have this whole thing in, but as a council, we do not have any laws in place. So legislation is important. You've got to pass laws to minimize the unnecessary wastage of material. And if you have a law but there's no fines, impose fines for people who do not separate the waste into different bins. So this will be linked to that. Either, look, there's a negative and a positive way. Either you can provide an incentive. Say, guys, if you do this, then you'll get a rebate on your account. So now you encourage them positively. Or, guys, if you don't do this, we'll have to charge you more for your waste. So you have to debate which way you want to go. Different people will use different methods. Education, we spoke about. Encourage recycling of items such as paper, tin, glass. That's over. Encourage citizens for reuse, items such as glass. Charge or penalize people extra if they want to generate more waste. The more waste you generate, the more. Now, what's happening in our local councils now, we have an environmental levy, for example, and this is not on solid waste. I'm looking at a different angle now. On the use of energy. The more you use, the more you pay for the environmental levy. So that means those that use more are paying more, and those that are using less are being rewarded in that they're paying less. So the same thing we can use here, where people that generate more solid waste, they must pay more. Those that generate less must pay less. And we can go on and on and on with this here. Remember, important, the R's. Reduce what you're using. Don't use too much, so you'll have less waste. Reuse. If something can be reused, like a glass container for something else, reuse it. And recycle. These 3 R's are important in this whole strategy. You can word something all around these 3 words to get along with this whole ideology here. Good. We move on to question 7. Question 7 talks to, again, environment. Ozone is found at low concentrations, 15 to 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface in the stratosphere. They're telling you about ozone and where it's found. Measurements show that there is a significant decrease in the amount of ozone. There is a significant decrease. It has been observed that there are holes in the ozone layer which get bigger each year. The main chemical responsible for the depletion of the ozone layer is chlorine, which comes from the breakdown of CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons. The CFCs are broken down by sunlight into chlorine atoms, which then react with the ozone. Ozone is then destroyed in this reaction. The problem is worse in the polar regions because of the low temperatures. Lower temperature, it stimulates this reaction, this negative reaction. An investigation to measure the ozone concentration and chlorine levels have been done in Antarctica since 1950, and the results are shown in the graph below. So you have to read all this to understand, and then they changed the cue from a verbal, from a written, to a graphical explanation. And they're giving you there where it comes from. On the x-axis, we have the year. On the y-axis, we have chlorine levels, and they're giving you the unit there. And on this side, we have the ozone concentration in arbitrary units. So some unit is given to you. And you'll notice that your years are equidistant apart. We could have made this time and put units as year. More correct. And here you see 0,5, 0,5, 0,5, right, we're going through that. So there you go with your story. What can we see over time? The chlorine levels are going up, and the ozone is coming down, and it's more or less not following the same pattern. But can you see, look at this area. This area is a classical area. Look at this line. I'm going to use two colors here. One for chlorine, it's going up that way, and another color for the ozone. It's going in that. Look at it. Almost corresponding increase, decrease there that we can see. And now we're seeing that as it's going further up, it's stabilizing, but it's still decreasing there, coming down to 200 arbitrary units. So we have now done the homework in terms of, or the groundwork in terms of the question. We need to now start working on the question. The first one says, give a caption for the graph, changes in the levels of chlorine and ozone concentration from 1950 to 1990. Now, when time periods are given to you, you've got to include it. And there it's included there. So you got your changes in the levels of chlorine and ozone concentration. So the one is affecting the other. The independent variable here will be chlorine, and the dependent variable ozone concentration, because chlorine is affecting the ozone concentration, not the other way around. Ozone is not affecting chlorine. Chlorine levels are affecting the ozone level. So dependent, independent. And we're giving a time period. So any other information you've got to give there. So that's our first answer. Second says, what is the relationship between the levels of chlorine and concentration of ozone? The levels of chlorine and the concentration of ozone. What is this relationship? Now, you've got to be very careful here, because it's not a straightforward relationship. You saw the graph. It didn't make one dip one way and one dip the other way. It had some things. So what we're saying here, first of all, as an increase in the level of chlorine leads to a decrease in the ozone concentration. This is after the relationship. But if I tell you, give the trend in the graph, then you needed to be a little more careful. Initially, as the chlorine levels increased, there was a gradual decrease in the ozone layer. Thereafter, from 1970 to 1980, there was a sharp. Can you see now what you're doing? You're giving the trend from the graph. There'll be more marks for that. So this one just asks you for the relationship between the two. You could have said that. From 1970 to 1980, there was a sharp increase in the chlorine consumption. At the same time, this had a corresponding effect to the ozone sharp decrease. From 1980 to 1990, the chlorine level continued to increase sharply, and the decrease in the ozone layer continued to happen, but at a slower rate. So can you see the difference between a general relationship and a trend? In a trend, you're explaining what is happening from point A to B, from B to C, from C to D. So you're going to give the, and you've got to get the information, extract the information from the graph. Good. Name the dependent variable in this investigation. And the dependent variables were chlorine levels and ozone concentration. Now, here we need to stop for a moment. Why are they dependent, both dependent in this case? Because they are judged over time. So time is the independent variable in that relation. But if we look at the relationship between ozone and chlorine, then chlorine is the one that's changing, so it's independent, and ozone is the one that is changing as a result of the chlorine changing. So that becomes dependent. However, because we're plotting them against time, time becomes the independent variable, and both levels are changing over time, and the investigator is changing time, not the chlorine nor the ozone. So that becomes the dependent variable as well. So be careful with that one. In which 10-year period was the ozone depletion the greatest? And that's easy. I showed you on the graph. That will be between 1970 and 1980. We looked at that in the graph. Let's go back to see that again. And there we go there. That's the biggest decrease there. In 1987, now they're directing you to something. In 1987, the Montreal Protocol was signed to lay down the targets to reduce the use of CFCs by countries. Give two reasons why, despite the reduction in the use of CFCs, there was a decline in the ozone layer. We have stopped using them, rather not stopped, but we've reduced them. How come we're still getting a decline? Obviously, the CFCs may persist for a long time in the atmosphere. We may have stopped it, but they remained in the atmosphere, and they continue to react. And other countries might have taken longer to implement the protocol. I mean, look at South Africa and the DDT we were talking about earlier. In a similar fashion, we may have, other countries may have signed it. And remember, I'm not talking about the CFCs now. I'm just linking it to that story there. But in this question, we're talking of the CFCs. So in terms of that, this is what can happen. Okay? Households were still using existing items of CFC. You have stopped using CFCs in the environment. But did you stop every household in every country from using the machine that they had that was producing CFCs? Did everybody sell off their machine and get new? We couldn't, because that economy would not be able to sustain that. That would mean that all countries would have had to tell the guys, listen guys, come here with your old machines. We'll give you so much a rebate if you use that. The same way in which South Africa is giving rebates for people to use solar energy to heat their water instead of geysers. Now, yes, it's happening. But imagine for every appliance, it's going to be a huge cost to the economy. And it can create other waste, solid waste. Because now, what are you going to do with that old fridge that was producing CFCs? Something to think about. Good. Name one item that humans were using which contained CFCs. Aerosols. You know what is aerosols? When you were spraying spray paint and anything that was compressed and you were spraying something out of it, had CFCs. We have now moved away from that, and we're using more upgraded equipment that will not use that technology. Big one was the refrigerators, the fridges at home, and the food packaging that we were using. Explain why the ozone layer is important for humans. Now, this is a theory question. Let's just go back to the article, however. I just want to see, nowhere in the article do they tell you why ozone is important. Otherwise, you must talk from the article. But in this particular question, this is now a recall question from your knowledge. Why? Why is it there? And you know by now that it has a protective function. And that is, ozone provides protection against the ultraviolet rays of the sun. So that means the harmful rays of the sun do not reach us, and if they do not reach us, they reduce the risk of getting skin cancer, one of the protection measures of ozone. Good. That brings us to question 8 in this series, and question 8 in this series deals with the essay question. Again, in terms of the essay question, you need to read carefully. Let's read this one. It says, the greatest threat to biodiversity is the destruction of habitats. This is the greatest threat to biodiversity. Is there a question in that? No. Let's follow. Describe how various human activities may lead to habitat loss. Is there a question in that? Not really a question, but an instruction. What is the instruction? You must describe something. Why? Because describe is the verb in this particular question, if you want to call it that. And describe is the adjective, is the doing word. What must you do for this? And let's see. So we must answer that now. Let's break this whole essay up. The question is how human activity leads to habitat loss. So the first question, first statement talks about urbanization. Urbanization. Big word, simply means people moving to the urban areas. And because of that, there's a greater demand to build houses. So land is cleared for housing because more people are coming into the urban area. And industries and roads leading to a habitat. Or rather, roads. These are the things. Land is cleared for housing, for industry, and for roads. What does this do? It leads to habitat fragmentation. It fragments the habitat. The habitat had so much space. Now we've come in between. The road has separated the habitat. The houses have separated the habitat. And the industry has separated the habitat. And this leads to a decrease in the genetic diversity, causing population to become extinct. So organisms that were existing are not existing anymore because of that. That is why before any project is taken these days, we have to do an EPA. And that is an environmental impact assessment. We need to know what will happen to the environment if you build this project. If you're talking about these houses, what's going to happen? And what do they do in these things? They look at organisms that are found there. Let's say, for example, they find an organism which is threatened, like bullfrogs or a type of species of butterfly. Then they're going to ask you, hello, you're going to destroy this area here. What's going to happen to these guys? And you need to motivate, as the developer, how you're going to put back into the environment that type of species. More about that later. Then we look at poor farming methods. Remember, we are looking at different ways in which humans influences habitat destruction. How we destroyed the habitat for organisms. So one of that is monoculture. Monoculture. Planting the same crop in the same area over and over and over again. This has disastrous effects on the land. So it allows only a few species of animals to survive because those animals are dependent on that crops that you are putting there. So you're losing a large number of plants and animals which would have been present if the crops were varied. In addition to this, monoculture will deprive that particular area of certain of the same nutrients year in and year out. So eventually the soil, etc., will lose the nutrients. And therefore, even that culture, that crop that you are growing, will not grow there because there won't be enough nutrients in there. So if you vary the crops, then the crops of different types of plants will have different requirements every year. So you give the soil time to recover. Remember, the question did not ask you for the solution. It only asked you for the impact. I'm giving you the other side so that you can be asked that also. How can we solve this problem? Overgrazing, another huge impact that we have. So farmers, they just put their cows and their cattle and their sheep and everything to overgraze on the land. And that leads to loss of the topsoil. And this then will promote erosion. And this will decrease, not spoil, that should be soil. Not spoil, but soil fertility. That P shouldn't be a tick, by the way. Soil fertility. Then we use of pesticides. We spoke about it earlier. Now we include it into our essay, which kills secondary consumers. So they're going to kill secondary consumers. This will lead to a lower biodiversity. Then we can talk about fertilizers. When we use it, remember the two separate points here. One is about pesticides and the secondary consumers. And then the next point is on fertilizers. which if we use them incorrectly and they wash into rivers, they disturb the ecosystem of the river, leading to extinction of some population. You could even include here your eutrophication story to explain how it came till that point. Then we go to the sporting arena, where golf estates are built, and this requires lots of water and vast clearance of vegetation. That means you've got to get rid of lots of plants in that area to create these nice greens that the golfers want to putt on, to make way for lawn in which only a few species will exist. So we have also destroyed the habitat of many organisms in this way. And we're going to build a golf club, a restaurant, we're going to draw pavings going through there. All of these things have a negative impact on the habitat. Mining results in degradation of the groundwater because of acid mine drainage. The water, the heavy chemicals are draining out into the water table, and this is causing a problem in the water source that we need, as well as the change in the pH of the water around the area. Emission of toxic gases into the atmosphere and also causes soil erosion. The environment is altered in such a way that organisms can no longer exist in the area. One idea come in mind here is in the area in Gauteng, in a particular area where the mines, in their residential area where the miners were living, there was a lake. In this lake, there were fish. People used to fish in the area. People used to swim in the area. The cattle used to grow around there as well. And over time, people saw that the cattle were dying, and they started doing investigations. They saw there was no fish in the water anymore. A whole lot of other things, but this led people to start asking questions. What's happening? And they started by measuring the pH of the water of the lake in that area. The pH was very low, acidic. Why? Because of the acid that was draining from the mines into that water body. So it killed. So that means no life could exist in the water. So that's what we are talking about there. Remember, this section is so vast. Your textbook will not be able to do justice on this section. You need to read more. You need to watch more documentaries that deal with the environment. And in South Africa, at the moment, the acid mine drainage is a huge topic for debate on a weekly, if not daily, basis. So follow these conversations, whether you use the internet, whether the radio, print media, etc., and you'll see what you get there. Deforestation, the demand for wood products, furniture in your houses, or wood to burn, may cause many trees to be cleared. What about paper? We're living in a paper society, and yet we have so much electronic media that we can circulate to each other without printing stuff. But we do this on a daily basis without thinking of how many trees have to be destroyed for that one piece of paper that you're getting. And then you use parts of your book and you throw away the rest without recycling, without reusing, without passing it on to somebody that may not have a notebook. The ecosystem within a forest area leading to extinction of certain population. Destruction of wetlands and grasslands. Again, these areas have been cleared for human inhabitation. Why? Because people want to live there. So we destroy the whole wetland or the grassland to build a little suburb, a little a group of townhouses, a cluster of homes, whatever you want to call it, or a little village for that matter. Remember the demand. And in South Africa, you've got to look at the background of where we're coming from. That not all the people were given sufficient housing up to 1994. Post 1994, when the new government took over, obviously apartheid was destroyed, and the rights of all the citizens has to be taken into account. And drive from one stretch of land to another stretch of land, and you see houses, 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 houses. Because people needed houses, and those houses needed to be built for them, and therefore this is what happened. So now we need to balance our requirements against the backdrop of the needs of the environment for sustainable growth and we need to talk about it. So we can't just talk about environment, environment, environment. You've got to look at the needs of the people against the backdrop of the environment, and you've got to compare those items. This essay, however, is dealing with how we have harmed the environment. So, and the biodiversity of the organisms surviving entirely on wetlands or grassland. So we have then killed all those organisms, and in that way, we have made way for massive loss of biodiversity. So again here, you would have got marks for content, 17 marks, and your last set of marks, your 3 marks, would have been for the synthesis. How is that given? Logical flow, relevance of your topic. In other words, are you talking about your whole syllabus? You're writing a lot. So remember, more writing does not mean more marks in the essay. Answer the question. You need 17 facts, not repeated facts, not recycled facts, independent facts, 17 different facts, not more than that. So in a typical essay, guys, your essay in life science should be no more than 2 foolscap pages. In fact, you can get your essay in life science, if you write properly, in 1 foolscap page. But I'm telling you, let's be generous. Go a little bit beyond that. 2 foolscap pages. If you're writing more than 2 foolscap pages, you are writing too much. Make sure that you restrict your answer to what is being asked. You will get marks, yes, but also if you mix everything up, you will lose marks because the marker may not find what you are saying and no logical flow and so on. So answer the questions, and the only way you can do that is to underline the keywords and answer that. And if we go back to our question, there we have our question. Describe how various human activities may lead to habitat loss. Simple. This was a straightforward essay listing some of the human activities and how are they destroying the environment. Not too much, but you had to be succinct and precise in what you said. In that way, you would have got the full marks. I'm hoping, guys, that this bit of experience has made you richer in terms of the skills that you need to answer a question paper, and it will lead to you getting better results at the end of this year and for the years to come. Remember, the skills you get here, you can transfer it to other subjects as well in terms of keywords and answering questions. And also, for those of you who are going to be successful this year and going to grade 12, it's going to be a benefit to you as well. In that way, you can produce great results and get into varsity or wherever you want to be. Let not your career choose you. You must choose your career. The only way you can choose your career is by equipping yourself with a basic good education so that you can then decide what you want to do. If you do not do well, you'll have to do what is available. That's what I mean by your career choosing you. Thank you. Enjoy.